My name is Miriam Bennett, and I'm a member of the Albuquerque monthly meeting of the Religious Society of Friends, and we're usually known as Quakers. So I want to just offer a taste of Quakerism and a little bit about the way that we worship. And this is very much about my particular experience. I'll tell you a little, just briefly mention later, but there's a lot of variety in Quakers. We're a very small group in the world, but we have a lot of variety. But I wanted to start with a really condensed version of history to give you a sense of where we've come. And I'll also be giving you I'm going to read some quotes of different Quakers throughout the ages because it gives you a little flavor of kind of our beliefs and some of the things that inspire us and make us work in the world. So Quakerism originally arose in England in the mid-17th century. That was a very hot time in England. There was a lot of political and religious things going on. And early Friends, as they started to call themselves, Friends of the Light, they rejected the authority of the church because they found that priests and other clergy could not speak to their condition. And they felt that they had direct experience of God and leadings of Jesus in themselves, and that was what made. So early Friends were so fired up by the revelation of this inward teacher that they understood, they felt something of God within them, that they traveled around and spread the word and preached, and they got in a heap of trouble. Because when you believe that everyone has that of God within them, it's a great equalizer. So Quakers got into trouble for opposing established churches, and also with the government, because they wouldn't take off their hats for judges because they said, we're equal. We don't take off our hats we're equal. And they would refuse to sign an oath of loyalty or to go to war. So that principle that everyone within us has the seed, and I say quotes when I say these words because that phrase, speaking to your condition, or the inward teacher, the seed, and the light, they're very important ways that Quakers have talked about their experience, their mystical experience of connection with God. So they had this idea that each of us has this seed of God within us, and we can know that when we become quiet and open to the light within, open to our own light that shines on what's good and what's difficult within us, and the light that's within other people. And so this was really quite a radical idea that we don't need the rituals of the church, and we didn't need clergy. And also from this principle that everybody has that of God within them means that we must not do violence against other people. Also that we can know truth if we really focus and receive that light, we can know truth. And we have to adhere to a standard of truth and integrity. Simplicity also was important in terms of manner of dress and conduct in the world. and also the way of speech. I don't know if any of you have any image of what a Quaker is? Do you have any experience with that?
Well, I was at a Quaker meeting one time.
Okay, so you have first-hand experience, okay. Well, I don't know if you've heard, you think of people with those bonnets and funny hats and dressed in gray. Yeah, so that was a way of being simple and not being kind of worldly. Also, friends spoke using thee and thy instead of you, because you is the formal, and also plural version. So saying you was a kind of an honorific. We don't think about it that way, but people would say. We don't do that very much. There are some Quakers, perhaps those ones in Iowa, who might say thee and thy still, or maybe in different parts, but not so much anymore. So these were really, being simple meant that it was trying not to be distracted from the spirit, to really have integrity and try to follow something, and be have a lot of integrity in that. So they were very strongly held beliefs, and in that time, in the 17th century, many friends were imprisoned and had many different punishments. They lost they had financial ruin a lot of times, and some even died. And both in England, and then when they came to the U.S. too, there were people who died for their religion. Yeah. Quakerism spread around England and other countries, where friends received both enthusiasm, because it was a very exciting idea for a lot of people, but it was also a very scary idea, especially for authorities. So a lot of opposition, including in the American colonies. So there were some of the colonies had, maybe come from religious prosecution in other places, but they weren't necessarily ready for these kind of radical Quakers to come and do these things. So, but then Pennsylvania, of course, was founded by William Penn, and he was a Quaker. So there's a mixture. So in North America in particular, because of many influences with westward migration and different things that happened, there really has been a big variation in the way that Quakers practice and the way that they perceive the original, kind of founding ideas. And in reality, even though we're a very small group in the world these days and kind of really shrinking in the US and England and places like that, there are many more Quakers that live in Africa and lots that live in South America. And the way that they practice and the way that many other Quakers practice in the US is very different from the way that I practice. In Africa in particular, they use a lot of song and a lot of outward energy that we're kind of quiet in the way that my tradition practices. So, and though there are Quakers in my community who love singing, we don't have it as a planned part of our worship service, but sometimes people, that's their ministry, that they share a song. So that happens. So I was raised and continue to practice in the tradition of what we call unprogrammed worship. We gather in silent, quiet waiting on messages or leadings, perhaps just a meditation, kind of sorting out what's happening in our lives. But sometimes we feel like we have heard something or feel something that is given to us. And from this communal silent worship, many times a friend will stand and speak. So we don't have a pastor, but we are all ministers. And sometimes our ministry is very quiet. Sometimes the whole hour is quiet. And at times that can feel very connected and gathered, even though nobody said anything. At other times, people say things that seem to be like, I was just feeling that very thing myself. So you never know. It'll always be different every time. So when somebody stands, they might speak a message they receive, something that rises in their heart that feels important to share. We all listen quietly, usually without response or comment, although sometimes there's laughter and sometimes there's, an expression of connection. And we just allow that ministry to settle in us. Beliefs of liberal Quakers, which is what I would kind of include myself in, they can range from very deeply rooted in Christianity, which the founders of Quakerism they knew their scripture and they were very, very deeply grounded in Christianity. But today, we have people who consider themselves Quaker, who might be agnostic, they might be non-theist, or they might have come from are influenced by a number of other kinds of religious traditions as well. And in some ways, what really unites us at this time is both our practice and our testimonies. So our testimonies are, we don't have a creed or a special book or something. Well, we do have some special books that give us some inspiration and things, but the testimonies are an expression of certain values and beliefs. And we have, that has been summarized very conveniently in the word spices. So S stands for simplicity. Live simply so that others may simply live. And try not to be distracted by material gain and possessiveness. P is for peace. Pacifism is an important, and nonviolence is a really very rooted, deep thing in Quakerism, and trying to live in a manner that does not support violence or war. I is for integrity. It's often said, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. When you say yes, you mean yes, and when you say no, you say no. So being honest and fair in our interactions. Many Quaker business people, and especially in those early days, were really, people liked them because they were very honest in their dealings, and so they became successful that way. C is for community, and that's an important value. Care and love not only for our family and immediate community, but for all those around us. And though our guide is inward, we depend on our community as a check on how we're perceiving the message of the Spirit, but also a support for our leadings and our way of life in the world. And community is really important when we think about the way that we do business, which is very special. And I mean business like in our religious, in our congregation, the way we do business is very particular and special because we don't have anybody, one person that leads us in a particular way. We do things by committees and by deciding all together. E is for equality. We're all children of God, essentially good and worthy of respect, well-being. That we're worthy of having a well-being and of love. The second S is for stewardship. We have a responsibility for care of the land and the gifts we have been provided with for our sustenance. The earth and everything on it requires our respect, love, and care. So that's spices. That's kind of a summary of some of the Quaker values. And as you can imagine, those kind of testimonies lead many friends to be involved and passionate about issues of peace and social justice. And Quakers have been associated with movements such as the abolition of slavery, the civil rights movement, many anti-war efforts, sanctuary, and a lot of different kinds of efforts to promote equality and justice. Organizations you might have heard of, like the American Friends Service Committee and the Friends Committee on National Legislation and Quaker Earth Care Witness, are just a few, some examples of organizations that work very strongly in the Quaker tradition of seeking peace and justice. So I'd like to share a few quotes from Quakers throughout the years to give you a flavor of our expressions of faith, and then we'll settle into a little time of waiting worship together, okay? And I think maybe some of the quotes will be, I hope will create a little seed in you of something that you might reflect on a little bit. And after that, I'd love to take some more questions. But we'll pause just now. I think I'll take more questions like after we've had that experience. But is there anything that you'd like to ask just now? We'll get your question. So early Friends were very, very steeped in the scriptures. They knew the scriptures very, very well, and they quoted them, and they, I think contemporary Friends in my milieu, probably much less so, but many are. But what I would say is that even early Friends, they said, these are very important. The scriptures are very important. The Bible is a important source. But it's not the only thing. Like, there was more of a focus on a living relationship that was directly transmitted to us if we can listen and feel it within us. So if that makes sense. So, and I think in my Quaker meeting, there are some people who know the Bible very well, who read the Bible, and there are many that don't. So it's probably become a little less of a source for many people. But I'm only speaking for this particular tradition that I have, which has it's got so many blendings of things, but there are many Friends churches and Friends meetings that use the Bible much more, yeah. So there'll be time for some more questions in a little bit, but thank you for that. This book, we're organized sort of by geography in groups we call yearly meetings, because we meet yearly in these bigger groups. My meeting, it's my church, but we call it a meeting, is called a monthly meeting because we meet monthly for business. This is like, we've been doing this for hundreds of years. So, but anyway, it sounds confusing because it's geographical, but it's also timely. At any rate, yearly meetings usually put together a book that kind of summarizes their ways of doing their business and things like that, but also is full of inspirations and different things that are important to our practice. So from this on living our faith, there's a saying we hear a lot of times, let your life speak. Friends testify through their lives, subscribing to no creed, recognizing as authority only the direct experience of the divine as we have found it within. Friends show forth our truth outwardly by the way that we live. Our actions, not any profession of commitment to notions, are the mark of our understanding of the divine. We hold ourselves accountable for what we say and what we do, our words and our deeds. No circumstance of our daily life qualifies this essential allegiance to the truth we feel driven to seek, the truth we find and experience. We give the name testimony to this witness of who we are. And I mentioned the testimonies that as spices. Okay. Isaac Pennington was a 17th century Quaker who was very important and who wrote a lot. And this is a quote that we hear a lot of times. Our life is love and peace and tenderness, and bearing one with another, and forgiving one another, and not laying accusations against another, but praying for another, and helping one another up with a tender hand. As I mentioned, was the founder of Pennsylvania, and again, another 17th century Quaker. Just to be part of this, we are too ready to retaliate rather than forgive or gain by love and information. And yet, we could hurt no man that we believe loves us. Let us try what love will do. For if men once did see we love them, we should soon find they would not harm us. Force may subdue, but love gains, and he that forgives first wins the laurel. Let's see, I'm just gonna... Another really important leader in the abolition movement was a Quaker who had to work very hard to convince other Quakers that slavery was a sin and that we needed to do everything we could to work against slavery. So John Woolman, this is a quote from him, "There is a principle which is pure, placed in the human mind, which in different places and ages hath had different names. It is, however, pure and proceeds from God. It is deep and inward, confined to no forms of religion, nor excluded from any, where the heart stands in perfect sincerity. In whomsoever this takes root and grows, of what nation soever, they become brethren in the best sense of the expression." And just gonna, there's many, many lovely ones in this book, but I'm gonna end with one of a 20th century Quaker. His name was Thomas Kelly, and he also had beautiful writings. And he wrote, "Life is meant to be lived from a center, a divine center, a life of unhurried peace and power. It is simple, it is serene, it takes no time, but occupies all our time." So with that, I'm going to invite us to, I'm taking too much time, to just sit together for a few minutes, we're going to just be quiet and perhaps thinking about some of the things that I've read or talked about, looking within ourselves about where that source of goodness and light that is within us. And we'll just do that for a few minutes. I'll just sit here for a moment, and after a few minutes I'll come and shake someone's hand, and I'll invite you to shake someone else's hand, because that's kind of the way we close our worship. And then we'll have a chance to talk just a little bit more and have some questions. It's a very, very short experience, but I've taken a lot of your time with all my talk, and I wanted you to have a chance to ask some questions of me. I was telling Barbara as I came in, usually...
Let's just see how many questions.
Yeah. Usually in our meeting house, we'd be sitting in a circle. And maybe 2 rows, because sometimes we have, some people. But in old meeting houses, they had benches that were in a row, but they had a few that were facing. But that feeling of community is often important in modern Quaker communities. We sit in a circle. So please let me know if you have any questions. And any kind of question is fine.
Oh, my question is, the agreement of the community was a precept from the very first, as I understood what you said. And is that why they didn't write down in the early stages of becoming Quakers rules and regulations of how they should act?
Yeah, it's interesting. They're actually, we have these books and things, and there were different periods of time that Quakers were very strict about how you act, and other times, to the very strict. But the reason, so they started to first they were kind of loose. They had these beliefs and they met together, and they would sit in silence, not just for 1 hour, sometimes for many hours. People would speak and then they'd be quiet. They just went on and on. But because they were persecuted, and because families were kind of broken apart by people being sent to jail and whatever, they had to figure out how to take care of each other in community. So they started to figure out how to know somebody was a member, that they had to take care of their family. And that's when kind of more organization started to happen. Yeah, and then, but we do, partly because the way we do business and things is kind of particular, we do have a lot of, we say we don't have a lot of ritual and we don't have a lot of rules, but I was raised Quaker, and there's certain things we do and we don't do, and sometimes my inner Quaker was like, oh no, we don't do that. so there are, but the idea, there's another idea that we need to be open to new ideas as well, that we need to have very clear integrity in our values, but within that we can understand that the world changes and that we need to figure out how it all fits together. But yeah, there really was, they didn't want to write down a particular creed and things because they felt that was too narrow, and that the living word was something that they needed to follow. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay.
Could you speak a little about the difference between Quakers and the Jehovah's Witnesses?
I don't know a lot about Jehovah's Witness. Honestly, I think probably, so I'm not good to talk about that, but my sense is we probably have very different theology. And I guess I can't, I don't. One thing about, the kind of Quaker that I have been raised in, we are very, very reluctant to proselytize in any way. That's not true of all Quakers. One reason there's so many Quakers in Africa and in South America is that some groups did go, often they went as missionaries to do certain good works, but they wanted to spread the word. Some people say that we don't, but a lot of the tradition is like, and early Quakers, they went around and they wanted to gather people. They wanted to tell them that they had the word. So it's not that evangelism is not something. It's just commonly in my strain of Quakerism, we're kind of like, oh, we don't want to tell anybody what to do. We're supposed to live, and people can follow our example if they see that that seems like something admirable. So, but that's why we're getting fewer and fewer Quakers. So, yeah.
I think I may have two groups confused. During World War
Worship by music has always been a great tradition of ours. We were growing up with. You enjoy music and I love your meditation, but now do you use music as a way of worship in your church?
My particular meeting, we don't use it much in our worship. We do, we do enjoy music. Our children use music a lot, but we don't, sometimes somebody stands up and sings and people might join with them, and many Quakers do use more music, but not so much in this particular tradition. Yeah, but there are many people who find it an important spiritual strength. We don't use it so much in our communal meditation and worship. You had a question?
I may be confusing two different groups. In World War II, there was a religious group that would serve coffee and donuts to the GIs at no charge. And was that Quaker or was that somebody else?
I don't know the belief in pacifism. Many Quakers didn't go to war. Many of them in World War II were, they did medics, yeah, and alternative service kind of thing because they couldn't fight. But then there's a sense of honoring everybody. But I don't know whether that would have been Quakers or not. But a lot of ambulance service, lots of building, doing good works. They might have had to go to conscientious objector camps, and then they built and did lots of other things like that. But I don't know, they were active. And that cohort of people in World War II, especially when they went on and they were very committed to all kinds of service and justice work. I know my mother worked with a lot of those people. So.
The word for them, I think, was conscientious objector.
Yes, conscientious objector, exactly. That was exactly. And some people refused to even register or whatever, and they went to prison. But a lot of people wanted to do service of some kind. Yeah. There's a question there.
Okay, you're here talking to us tonight and leading us. Do men and women equally lead and plan and that kind of thing?
Beautiful question. Because of the focus on equality, from the very early days, women and men served in the church and as ministers, in the sense that they weren't ordained or whatever, but they went out and ministered to people, and then in many meeting houses, this is kind of interesting. They're really old ones, like where my grandmother used to go in the eastern shore of Maryland. There was a meeting house that was like 300 years old. I loved, in the summertime we could meet there, and I loved that building. But it, like many old meeting houses, had a partition in the middle. Yeah, and the idea was that the women had, because when they did business, they had a separate business meeting. And I think the idea was for them to have an equal standing. I mean, you could see that as like not equal, but I think it was for them. And it's not like they didn't talk to each other. They sent messages, but they worked together. And I was sorry that I wanted to share with you a quote from an early woman, because there were many people who were suffragettes, who were abolitionists, who were very, very important in the early Quaker movement and throughout. Yes, we're all, and you would see leadership of all kinds.
Not be distracted by the sexes than equality.
Oh, whether people would be distracted from each other, I'm not sure about that. But it was really, equality was an important value. But it was the 17th century and then the 18th century, and I'm sure I think that women still were expected to serve certain roles and men certain other. But yeah, another question.
I do. You talked about God, but you haven't mentioned Jesus. Does your church believe in the risen Savior?
Yeah, so in the very beginning, I mentioned how the Bible and Jesus being a very, very, Christ being a really important influence for the foundation. And as it's evolved, it's various in different groups of how one views Jesus as divine savior or as a teacher. People have really different beliefs about that. And again, in different traditions of Quakerism, whether that's emphasized or less emphasized. But certainly in the foundations, Jesus was very important. And there was a sense that those teachings were things that we embody and that we live out as clearly as possible. Yeah.
So in the book, in your little pamphlet, it tells about children being a part of your group meetings for a while, and then they split off. Is that still so? And do you have programs for like teens?
Oh, lovely question. So, and we're a very small little group, but we happen to have a really gifted first day school. We call it first day school. Early on, Quakers, the simplicity, they didn't use the name Sunday, Monday, whatever. It was like first day and first month and second month, and like they didn't use the names. But anyway, so we call it first day school. Anyway, we have a very gifted first day school curriculum coordinator who teaches the Sunday school, basically. Because we've been pretty small, but we have probably, on a typical Sunday, we might have 40 or 50 people meeting. It's not a big group. And we do it hybrid a lot of times, so some of them might be on Zoom and some of them might be in the room nowadays, since the pandemic. We might have, sometimes we have, 15 children or something, from little to whatever. And just recently, we've been able to have somebody who is going to do more with the teens, because probably, as in many of your congregations, that's a time when people kind of drift off a little bit. We really find that's very true, that they just don't find what they need, when they're growing up. So we now have somebody who's going to be really working with the teens. But because our curriculum coordinator, our first day school teacher, has been so good, she's tried to include everybody. And the way it happens is the children sit with us in silence for about 10 minutes, which is extraordinary. They do they practice a lot. And then they go and they do a lesson together, which involves a lot of play and song and all kinds of stuff. And then they come and introduce themselves. So, yeah. Yeah, did you have yeah. Oh, here.
Do you all go to the public schools, or do you encourage home teaching?
No, mostly it's probably really varied, but there's no, partly because Quakers are very civic-minded and very things about equality. We would definitely support everybody to have a good education that would be available to them without cost. So there's a huge variety. It depends on what the child needs. Now, one thing Quakers have done very well through hundreds of years is to to create schools. And I went to a Quaker school for a couple of years of my junior and senior year of high school. And so they aren't just for Quakers, but because they have these principles of providing good education, wholesomeness and integrity, and really a value on education and learning and things. So, and some in our congregation homeschool because it's better for their particular child, but we don't pull our children out of the schools particularly for any reason.
Are there any Quaker universities or colleges?
There are many, yes. But both of my parents are products of Quaker colleges, and yeah, so there's quite a few around. Yeah, not as many out here, but on the East Coast, there's a lot of Quaker schools. Mm-hmm. I love your questions. Oh, okay. No, that's all right. We have one more over here, and then in the front after. But you have the just a second. Yeah, go ahead.
Charlie, one of our residents here, Edna Cassman, went to Swarthmore, which is a Quaker school, Quaker University.
Yeah, it's a Quaker college. I actually lived in Swarthmore. That's where my father grew up. But I didn't go to Swarthmore. Well, I think I have a grandmother that attended there for a period of time, but I lived in the town. And I went, actually, that's where I was born at Swarthmore. I mean, that was the meeting I was born into, was Swarthmore meeting. And then Haverford College is also in the Philadelphia area. That's, my mother grew up close to that, and that's where my father went to school, and uncles and lots of people. And in North Carolina, there's Guilford. There's also Bryn Mawr. Maybe you've heard of Bryn Mawr. That's another Quaker school. Yeah, and let's see. Earlham is in Indiana, and it also has a school of religion. And as Quakers moved west, their practices often changed. So a lot of the people on the East Coast in the Philadelphia area kind of practice in a similar way to what I do. But in the Midwest and West, there's a lot of mixture of the different traditions. Yeah. But there's I guess you have a mic there. So that's good.
Let's see.
How do Quakers deal with romance?
Romance? What an interesting question. Is there anything particular about that, or?
No. Are there rules? Are there lines that are drawn?
Well, in the past, since I mentioned there was a time when rules were really, really important. It was a time when they kind of turned inward and they got very protective of their community. And so at that time, if you married outside of Quakers, you were in a big trouble. You got read out of meeting. That doesn't happen anymore. No. No, I mean, there's actually a sense that we are given by God these gifts of love and of connection that are really important, and that our families are important, and our ways of connecting in whatever way they are is supported, and is we have, when you get married in the Quaker meeting, because we do not have a pastor, right? We don't have a clergy. So there's a committee that meets with the couple, and they talk with the couple and find out if that couple is really ready for this commitment. And then when the couple gets married, because we don't have clergy, the couple actually marries each other, but everybody in the meeting is kind of responsible. And we have a certificate that says how they commit to each other, and the couple signs it, and everybody who has attended signs it. And many people, if they have that certificate, they put it on the wall, because a friend of mine was just telling me, I have a friend and I signed her wedding certificate 35 years ago. And every year I send her an anniversary card, and she's so impressed by that. She said, my friend said, I take that very seriously, that I signed that certificate, that I am holding, that I take care of their relationship, and I hold it. So, yeah, and that's kind of an example of everything that we do. We make decisions not by voting. We don't vote. It's kind of like consensus in that we all have to agree, but it's a little different than consensus because we believe that it's the group of people plus spirit, that we are led by God, by spirit. People have different ways of phrasing that. By the light is another, we use that term a lot. And that when we have a big decision to make, we all have to feel that that's okay, that's good, that's something to do. Sometimes we have big decisions. And yes, and sometimes there's not. Sometimes we have to say we're not ready to make this decision. Sometimes somebody will say, you know, I don't feel comfortable with this decision, but I can feel that everybody in the room, that other people feel that this is the right thing to do. So I will stand aside. I will let this go through, but I might even want to be named to say that I couldn't really agree, but I feel. And then sometimes somebody says, I cannot let this decision go. In my conscience, the light is telling me that it's not okay. And then we kind of have to stop. And sometimes we come back to it. Yeah, sometimes we come back to it a different way. Sometimes, you know, it takes a long time to do business the way we do business, I tell you. It really does. It does. But it's also very beautiful. I mean, it really, you know, you have to learn to figure out, to listen really, really well, and also to let love be very important. That, you know, like, I really love this person who is so difficult to be with because we, you know, and so I will try to listen. I will try to find a different way that we can, maybe a third way. And sometimes it's hard. You know, actually Quakers, one of the reasons there's so many different kinds is that we've like split apart and done different things. But you know what, then this summer in South Africa, there was a huge conference of representatives of Quakers, of all different kinds of Quakers from all over the world. And they used to do this fairly regularly, but then things like the pandemic happened and it's hard. But anyway, they kind of get together and try to figure out, what do we have in common? We have really different ways of practicing. Our theology might be kind of different, you know, things like that. But there's something about us that we are friends. So, friends with a capital F is how we say. So,
is that marriage recognized by the state?
Yes, you know, what happens is you get a marriage certificate, and so we whereas we don't have a particular person who is the authority. We do, you know, to lead our meetings, we do appoint somebody to be kind of we call it a clerk. It's not necessarily a leader, but it's a person who helps organize and helps drive. It is a leadership role. It's like they're a very good listener. They help us figure out, you know, and that person will sign for the meeting. And like my meeting is also a corporation. We incorporated for many reasons. Just because like a lot of churches do that, you know, so that you can do business in a certain way. So, for example, I was a clerk of the meeting for 2 years, and as that, I was president of the corporation. Well, they didn't have somebody to take over for me, whatever. So we can ask somebody to sign that wedding license. And interestingly, because the way the statutes in New Mexico are, that usually it requires like a pastor or else a judge or somebody to certify a wedding. There is a part of it that pertains actually to Native American communities, to the Pueblos and tribes, because they don't certify marriage in the same way. So under that, Quakers also can have the same kind of thing. Yeah. That's a long question, long answer. All right.
How is the church financed?
How are we financed? We give donations. So, we have this strong sense of responsibility. We don't ask people to do a specific thing. We don't pass a collection plate, but we're honest. And because we're all involved in the budget, we are all making those decisions. So we know, like we decided to spend that money, so we need to be able to give money for it. So it's a personal responsibility kind of thing. And just as other Quaker, other churches, we donate to the meeting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
In Quaker simplicity, is there any room for ritual, such as communion?
So we don't have communion in the same sense, and we've always said, like, we don't have ritual, but we kind of do. I mean, our way of doing business and they're not set in stone, whatever. But we don't do communion, and it's just very simple. Now, I can't speak for every. There are more. There are many meetings, or they might also call themselves churches, where there might be, they don't sit in silence. They have a service, and they have songs, and they have different things. They may or may not do something like communion, but they because there's lots of different influences. But it hasn't been a thing that we've done. Yeah. I guess one more question. I don't want to keep you too long. I've been about Jesus, and as I had said before, so Jesus and the Christ story and everything and the Bible, very, very, very important in the foundation of Quakerism. And nowadays, there's a great variety of. Many people will say that is one thread of a very, very important tradition and story and connection to God. But they might view it, they might also say there are other threads as well. So I would say the expression is different among different people at this time. There are many Quakers who might say, Jesus was a great teacher. I don't necessarily literally take the story of the divinity and things in the same way. So it's kind of varied. It's different among different people. Yeah. Yeah. I thank you so much for your questions and attention. You're very, very kind, and I've talked way too long. But I would like to say, please, if you have any interest, you are always most welcome. We delight in having people who stop in and see what's happening at our meeting house. We meet at 10:30 on Sunday morning. We also have availability for meeting on Zoom. And if you were interested in doing that, you could get my email and stuff through Barbara, and be happy to link you in, because not every Sunday, but every other Sunday well, there's always a Zoom group, but often we're hybrid. So yeah. And if other questions come up, you'll ask Barbara, and she'll ask me. So thank you so much for your patience, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
You've enlightened all of us, I'm sure.